This is Matthew Cratter from Trade University, and today I want to talk about why we really need Bitcoin. It's sometimes easy to get lost with all of the volatile price action and to get distracted and to really forget some of the real reasons that we are here, especially with all the distractions like the dog coins, Shiba Inu and SafeMoon and Dogecoin, etc. These are giant distractions, and the people who peddle these probably don't understand the dire situation that we're in and how Bitcoin is a fix, unlike any other fixes to the current problems. So to understand this, I have to rewind a little bit and talk about what a traditional government looks like. The traditional model of the state is that the government or state collects some percentage of goods or services that are produced in the economy in the form of taxes. So it's some percentage, 1 or 2% of GDP, or however you want to measure it. And then the state or government takes those taxes and reinvests them into the country itself, into roads, into other infrastructure, and that can be physical or digital infrastructure. Also using those tax receipts and that tax revenue to protect the citizens of that country from foreign invasion. This is one of the original reasons for government, and also to protect the innocent, the domestic innocent, from the violent domestics who want to destroy businesses and break into people's houses, etc. This is the traditional reason for taxes and for government, to protect innocent people, to protect the country, and to build out the infrastructure. And what you have under this traditional model really is an alignment of incentives. What's good for the people is good for the government. And by wisely investing these tax receipts back into the country, the government grows the country, grows the economy, modernizes the infrastructure, protects small businesses from violence and thieves, and allows everyone to become more educated and more productive. If you have a good school, a good educational system that's funded by the government, this is what can happen as well. Higher productivity and wise reinvestment of these tax receipts, of this tax revenue, grow the economy, thus growing the tax base itself. The GDP grows, and the more taxes can be collected, not by raising the tax rate, but because you have organic growth of the economy. And this really is a virtuous circle. As I said, this is what it looks like when the incentives are aligned between the government and the people. What's good for the people is good for the government. What's good for the government is good for the people. And the government is actually populated by real human beings and not lawyers and investment bankers. If you're finding this video helpful so far, I'd encourage you to hit that subscribe and like button, and maybe pass this video on to a few of your friends who are really into the altcoins and don't understand Bitcoin or the ideological reasons for it existing. So that's the traditional view of the government, the traditional function, which is to treat its citizens well, grow tax receipts, grow the economy. Now we have the modern central bank-driven economy. The U.S. central bank was started, the Federal Reserve was started early in the 20th century, and it has really destroyed the U.S. dollar in the process. And now we live in this system, the central bank-driven system, where everything is ruled by, as I said, the lawyers, the central bankers, investment bankers, and rent-seeking politicians. Enter the money printers, which we've been talking a lot about for the past year. This is an economy that's driven by false prosperity, by money printing. And rather than funding all government spending with tax revenue, maintaining a balanced budget, which means the government spends what it brings in, under this modern version of the state, you have the central bank printing up lots of new money, using it to buy government debt, and thus allowing the government to spend beyond its means. The technical term for this is quantitative easing, or monetizing deficit spending. It's also a version of MMT, which is a wolf that goes under a sheep's name, or goes around in sheep's clothing, calling itself MMT. The problem with a central bank-driven economy, where the government can just print up its own money, or have its central bank print up its own money when it needs to, At this point, the state no longer has to care about wisely reinvesting those taxes, that tax revenue into the economy, into the country's infrastructure, into its educational system in order to benefit its citizens and grow the tax base. The government no longer has to rely on taxes. It can just print up as much money as it needs. And so you have this situation where the government is not just stealing from people in the form of taxes, which can be justified up to a point if it's used ultimately for the common good. But under this system, taxes don't go away. In fact, they might even go up. But there's confiscation of wealth through inflation and through devaluing the currency by printing up a lot more of it. You get things like universal basic income, which we're almost at that point. It's under the cover of COVID payments, but you're basically paying people to stay home and remain unproductive, to stay home and watch Netflix. And we're really seeing this play out in the real economy, at least in the US, where there's just a huge amount of jobs available and people don't want to fill those jobs because the government is paying them more than that to stay at home. So under the central banker system, there's no longer an alignment of incentives. The government no longer cares what the people need. The government is really incentivized to just invest in bread and circuses, send people checks, make sure they can just stay home and watch Netflix and pornography and just stay quiet and not bother anyone and not try to overthrow the system. Now, under a lot of money printing, stocks and real estate go up in price, hard assets go up in price, or scarce assets go up in price. And as a result, you get more and more wealth inequality. Those who own these assets get richer. The people in the 50th percentile and below, who tend not to own very many stocks or investment portfolios and tend to rent, their rents go up and they don't have any hedge against this excessive money printing. And then what happens is this wealth inequality begins to really drive social unrest. And rather than just coming out and admitting it's the central bankers who are behind it and their crazy money printing, the government and the government schools are known as public schools, come up with ridiculous ideological explanations for the growing wealth gap, try to pit its citizens against each other, the reds versus the blues and the blues versus the reds, teaches people to hate one half of the country just because they voted for a different president. And this is another way, along with bread and circuses, to keep the population under control and fighting at each other rather than going after who's really behind this. We're beginning in the U.S. to see increasing violence on the street battles that are quite reminiscent of the transition from the Weimar Republic, where there was hyperinflation and money printing, to the rise of Hitler in Germany. Public education just becomes an indoctrination system under fiat money and money printing, where you're no longer taught to actually think, but you're just taught to virtue signal. You recite ideological talking points, and this is very similar to a lot of totalitarian systems we've seen in the 20th century, especially systems like China under Mao. Mainstream media becomes captive to the fiat system. You have all these economists like Paul Krugman writing apologies for the fiat system, and you have a lot of apologists for war as well. And these foreign wars are made possible, very unwise foreign wars are made possible by printing money. And unfortunately, it's never the politicians' children who are sent to die in these wars. It's always the lower 50th percentile who may be forced into military service simply because they're not jobs available for them. So that's really where we are today in the U.S. We have tax revenues of about 3.5 trillion, and we have actual federal spending that's about 7 trillion. So this gap, which is called the budget deficit, the difference between the money that's coming in and the money that's going out, is about 3.6 trillion. And this is the money that needs to be printed up by the Federal Reserve and used to buy government bonds to fund this deficit spending. So you can see the contrast between the two systems. We have the traditional model where taxes pay for everything and are used for the benefit of the citizens. And then you have the modern central banker fiat system, which increasingly pits members of the population against each other and also basically corrupts the press, corrupts the educational system, and ultimately hurts the economy because you're not really educating people, you're just indoctrinating them in ideological talking points. So this is really where I'm coming from when I talk about Bitcoin. It's not just the price action or getting rich from Bitcoin, but I believe that buying and hodling Bitcoin and helping to move us to a Bitcoin standard through education, which is one of the reasons I'm running this channel, it's not just about making a lot of money from Bitcoin going up, though that's definitely a side benefit. And there's nothing wrong with an economy that's driven by self-interest and greed in a moral sense, where people are doing what is best for them. Buying Bitcoin is a moral imperative simply because it's a way of fighting the central banker system. And it harnesses greed, which can be a terrible thing, but if it's harnessed in the interest of using free markets and using a free economy to price goods and services rather than prices being set by some centralized economy. We know from 20th century history that centrally controlled economies like Maoist China or the Soviet Union, they just are much less productive, both in terms of keeping the grocery shelves full and scientific advances as well. And so Bitcoin is one way. It's a Trojan horse that could help us to overthrow the existing system. It's a protest against the existing system. If you become a Bitcoiner and a hodler, it's a way of protesting against the existing system, harnessing your own greed to change the system. And it's a protest that neither the political left will give you nor the political right will give you. There's this false divide that's meant to keep people at each other's throats and not to see the man behind the curtain who's manipulating everything, the central bankers. And this is one reason it's actually a great tragedy that people like Elon Musk, who are doing very good work in terms of space exploration and electric vehicles, his entry into cryptocurrency space has been a complete disaster, and he's really distracted people. Memes are great. I have nothing against them. But his emphasis on Dogecoin, his lack of understanding of Bitcoin has been quite tragic, actually, because he had a platform here. He was given a platform where he could really push through some of these critiques that I've been talking about in this video. And instead, he's going the way of memes and manipulation. When you read about altcoins, when you listen to altcoin promoters, whether it's Monero or Cardano or XRP or Ethereum, remember what they're trying to do and try to see what they're trying to do. Bitcoin is a store of value. It's a way of overthrowing the central bankers, and there's a lot of deep thought behind Bitcoin that's not really present among altcoin promoters, who are just using it really to try to get rich from people who are staying at home, trading with their stimmy checks, which of course are produced by the Fed money printers. So keep this in mind when you're considering whether to invest in Bitcoin or another currency. If you understand how the economy is currently set up and how in the US we've transitioned, and really in most countries in the world, I'd say we've transitioned from a system where the incentives are aligned between the government and the people versus what we have now, where the people are actively being harvested in a matrix-like manner by the government. And the government has completely moved away from the moorings and the strong foundation and the stability that's caused by living on tax revenues rather than just printing up money and using it for whatever you want. When you're a government that's relying on tax revenues, you have to do what's best for the economy and what's best for the people rather than what's best for Wall Street and the central bankers. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.